So the book is about Islam's problems with the West, really, and also with freedom, democracy, and modernity. Mainstream Islam is mentioned a lot in the book, and this is because I don't think that a concept as Islamism is enough, or it's really kind of misleading to talk about Islamism, because mainstream Islam is Islamism, or Islamism is really mainstream Islam. And mainstream Islam is the literal approach to Islam, literal approach to the Quran, the holy book of Muslims, and the ahadith, which are the writings about the life of the Prophet, and the seerah, that is the biography of the Prophet Muhammad. And you need to read these things all together to understand what mainstream Islam is theologically, because there's a concept in Islam that is named abrogation, and abrogation is about the fact that if there are two different points of view in the Quran, for instance, in Quran it says that alcohol is permitted, and then it says alcohol is forbidden. So what is the truth to Muslims? So they see what the Prophet did throughout his life, and what he did later in his life. That is what counts in mainstream Islamic theology. And therefore, alcohol is forbidden in Islam. And also, therefore, we have all of the problems with violence and wars and so on, because the Prophet of Islam, he waged war later on in his life. So all of the ayahs in the Quran that are about the wars and the violence and so on, they mostly came afterwards. So this is what counts. The violence counts more than the more peaceful times and peaceful ayahs in the Quran. So this is why we have a problem with the violence theologically and theoretically, but also as we see it now in the West, and also all around the world in real life. Then we have reformers, and this is also why I use the concept mainstream Islam and just don't say Islam, because there are few, but they are there, and they are very brave Muslims who will not accept the literal approach to the text, to the Quran, to the Hadith, and so on. And they are also called infidels, kuffars, and they're seen as ex-Muslims or pretend Muslims, because they challenge the literalist approach to Islam. So they are at risk at the same way that I am or other ex-Muslims are whenever we stick our heads out and are in the public debate. So they are the reformers, and the reformers cannot have a literalist approach, not even to the Quran, because a literalist approach means that everything is correct, what's in the Quran, and that it is the God's perfect words. So you cannot have that point of view and be a real reformist, in my opinion, because you have sex slavery is legitimized by the Quran, for instance. Jihad is as well. Mainstream Islam does not, unfortunately, mainstream Islam unfortunately does have the power today. The powerful actors in Islam, the big groups, sects, schools of thought, and so on, they belong to the mainstream Islam, the literalists. And then you have the few modernists or reformists challenging them. And this is, of course, this has many reasons, and reformers have always been there, also from, I think I believe that reformists have always been there, but they are always threatened, killed, or they don't get to say their opinion. They're being threatened even today in the Western world. Now the rest of my speech is going to be about me, and I hope that you don't find this narcissistic, because I am being I'm being blamed for being a narcissist by a social authority in Denmark already. I was born in Iran. My father fled Iran as a political refugee. I have been critical of Islam ever since I stepped into the public debate since 2003, and really I started being critical from 2007, because I would still travel to Iran, so I had to watch a little bit of what I was saying, because I wanted to document some of the things going on in Iran at that time. I wrote a couple of at maybe 10 or 15 articles about what was going on in Iran, more objectively, when I was going back and forth to Iran. Then I stopped that in 2008, and then I was more honest, and in 2009 the protests in Iran and so on, I was the spokesperson for Free Iran in Denmark, and then I decided I cannot go back to Iran anymore. So it's not safe for me to go back. In 2015, I survived an Islamic terrorist attack in Copenhagen. We had a Lars Vilks committee. We had he's a Swedish Mohammed drawer, and we had a meeting about freedom of speech and the Mohammed drawings, and also other topics of political art. And then this ISIS terrorist, or he swore to the al-Baghdadi, who is the leader of ISIS, before coming in and tried to kill us. He also killed one of the attendees to the meeting, who went outside and probably then was shot dead. Because of this, I received threats, and a social authority in charge of foster parents licensing in Denmark is now threatening me and my family because I receive threats from Islamists. My oldest is 8 years old, and she's legally a foster child. We got her when she was 2 days old, and she's always been with us, and she's happy and healthy and living her best life. There's nothing wrong. She doesn't know about the threats. She's secure, and she has never been affected by the fact that I get threats. She doesn't know really anything about Islam. She's starting to ask questions about Iran, so now she's maybe starting to learn a little bit, but she's not involved in my activities. She is not affected by my job as a writer, blogger, and so on. But this social authority also says that they're not concerned about our child, but they're concerned generally because I'm a foster parent, and that my job is not compatible with the fact that I'm also a foster parent, because I receive threats from Islamists. They know that she's fully integrated, and the municipality in charge of the case knows that she's happy and healthy, so there is nothing there to point at when it comes to her well-being. The social authority has now put us under increased supervision, and in their report they write, and I quote, in relation to the work of the foster mom as a journalist and blogger, and the social supervisory authority does not find it in principle worrying. However, the work of the foster parents, if the work of the foster parents negatively affects the family's overall security and stability, the social supervisory authority must deal with this. The social supervisory authority therefore notes that the foster family has felt compelled to have a protected address, as well as name protection, as they experience hatred against the foster mom. As a foster family, you are required to offer a foster child safe and stable conditions, which is not compatible with putting yourself and your family at risk. They also write in the same report that, and I quote, the social supervisory authority finds it worrying that the foster mother has difficulty distinguishing a foster child's need for security and stability and her own ambitions to share her own opinions with the public, which puts her family's safety at risk. They also, in one of the reports, call me a narcissist for talking about surviving the terrorist attack in 2015 in the public debate. When I objected the name calling, they erased the narcissist part and then they put another sentence in instead, and I quote, the foster mom has a limited perspective on the cases in which she involves herself in. So now a social authority in Denmark has concluded that I, as an Islam critic, have a limited perspective on the cases I involve myself in. This means I write about or I have commentary on. And this I can't understand really. And but it's on paper, it's real, and it's out there and it's documented. When I asked the supervisory authority whether I am putting myself at risk, the leader of the organization said, but you tell us yourself that you receive threats. Then I said, but am I putting myself at risk in this situation? And am I to blame? And then she said, but you tell us you receive threats. So that's her opinion. So I told her that her attitude is this rape. And then people talk about whether she was wearing too short of a skirt or whether she was drinking. She couldn't understand the comparison. Therefore, I have now given up my blog at Jyllandsposten, where I had been writing for many years, since 2010. And I have also stepped out of the public debate altogether. This pains me, of course, and now even being here might be used against me and problematized, but I had this arrangement with Jamal. We were talking about me coming last year, and then I was pregnant and it didn't really fit into the plan. So we had this plan long time before this ever happened. So this is why I'm here, and I'm very happy to be here. And one good thing, though, that has come out of this is that I now have proof that I had a real job, because my husband would always tease me, get a real job because of the low earnings doing what I do. So I can say now I had a real job. My job was a problem. So I have to find something to laugh about in this situation, because the situation is Kafkaesque. It's hard to understand that this is reality in Denmark, my new country, the free country my father fled to as a political refugee. And the reason why he fled Iran is now the reason why I don't have my freedom of speech. And the violent and intolerant Islamists have won yet again, and the Iranian embassy must be joyful. I don't think that a politically correct person would ever have to go through what I have been through. I don't think that a foster mom who had refugees welcome signs and got threats from the right wing would ever have to experience this, and nor should anyone experience this. As long as you do not incite violence or criminal acts, you should be free to say whatever you want. Free speech is the pillar of our free societies. And in my book, I also warn against the persecution of Islam critics in the West, and now it has hit me, and I realized that I wasn't even prepared for this. And Jamal yesterday, he asked me, he showed me the picture pages in my book, and he said, "You wrote this before this happened to you, right?" And I said, "Yes, I wrote this before this happened to me." And I both write about the fact that our authorities have started not telling us the truth whenever, for instance, that terror attacks happen. And also the fact that the persecution of Islam critics is happening, and it's really a problem for our free democracies in the West. We live in a fragile and polarized situation, in polarized and fragile democracies in the West, and the Western world is experiencing an identity crisis. Islam, political correctness, and identity politics, for me to see, are the problem. These are the reason why we are here and why we are where we are. But everyone, no matter what our stance in the politically charged democracy crisis, we all need to come together and try and keep trying to have an honest, critical conversation, and keep on insisting that we need to have this discussion about Islam, even though the threats are real and they won't go away. The less we talk about Islam, the more the Islamists are going to win, and this can't be happening again. Now in the West as well. And we need to insist on civilized disagreement, and this is the pillar of our free democracies. Our safety and our democracies and freedom are at stake. And in my book, I also warn about the rise of terrorism. I don't believe that we will experience civil war in the West, but I do believe that if the polarized situation, the polarized political situation continues to be as polarized as it is today, and if we experience censorship and self-censorship and persecution of free speech, we will have a reality in our future with more terrorism, both left-wing terrorism, right-wing terrorism, and also, of course, Islamic terrorism. We therefore, all of us, have a responsibility to condemn any forms of violence, any forms of intolerance and threats. And in Norway, you have experienced right-wing terrorism, and you, of course, have to condemn such acts. But that doesn't mean that we are not going to have an honest and open discussion about and critical discussion about Islam, because this discussion is essential for the problems that we have with Muslim immigration in the West, and they're not going to go away by themselves. They're going to grow and become even bigger problems if we ignore and keep ignoring this problem. This coming month, Danish Folk Party in Denmark has called the social minister in the parliament for a consultation, an open consultation, where they're going to ask about my case and my freedom of speech. And by that time, me and my family, we have been threatened for 6 months. For 6 months, a social authority has been threatening me and my family because I receive threats from Islamists. They are threatening an 8-year-old daughter of mine because I am an Islam critic, and I receive threats because of my usage of my freedom of speech. I really hope that the Danish parliament, once they go into this consultation, the government will decide to make it very clear that everybody in Denmark has a freedom of speech, and that also includes me. This all started back in March when I got charged by the police on a suspicion that I had done something illegal. And this was because I shared a link from Reddit, a social media which is called Reddit. I shared a link from Reddit on my Facebook. It was a link to a video of the beheading of a terrorist attack in Morocco, where a Norwegian and Danish woman, Louisa Vestager Jespersen and Maren Uland, were killed in an Islamic terrorist attack in 2008 in December. I have not yet been formally charged nor questioned by the police yet, but they have a suspicion. A week after the police told me about this suspicion, and I told the press that I was being charged. Not formally in Denmark, we have 2 sets of charges. We have a first one, which is they suspect you of something, and then they question you, and then they might charge you if they find they have enough evidence. So I'm at the first level of the charge. A week after that I told about this in the public, this social authority sent us a letter wanting to remove our license as a foster family. They told us that this charge meant that it wasn't compatible with the fact that I was a foster parent, and also I was now a bad digital role model, and I got threats because I was in the media, and I kept on being in the media. So this is not. This is also a critique that they had to begin with. But now they have backed down a little bit on the charges because the politicians and a lot of commentators and politicians, both on the right and left, went out when this came out in the press and said this can't be happening. This is critical. You cannot criticize somebody's freedom of speech in this way, and you cannot use a charge like this when the child is perfectly fine, and so on. And we have been in dialogue with this social authority. We have answered a lot of questions, and we have been to meetings, and we have our attorney on this case, but they haven't backed down. On the contrary, they have increased their criticism of my usage of my freedom of speech. They have backed down a little bit on the charges. Now they find the charges problematic but not incompatible. They find my freedom of speech incompatible now with being a foster parent. Now about the sharing of the link to the video and why I did this, why I shared this horrendous video, or I didn't share the video. I shared a link to the video. I didn't upload anything. This was, of course, a very barbaric and cowardice act of Islamic terrorism in Morocco. This act of terrorism was not reported about in Denmark, or at least the truth about what had happened to the women was not reported about. 2 Scandinavian women were beheaded. They were camping in the mountains and were beheaded by Islamic terrorists. And this is, of course, mainly to the fact that Danish authorities, Danish police and foreign ministry and justice ministry and Danish intelligence, they chose to tell the same things. I call them lies, but you can, I will tell you what they told the public, and you can decide for yourself whether you think that is lying or not. They told the public what Moroccan authorities was telling the public, and this was that the women were found dead with signs of violence. The women were found dead, beheaded. And they also used the term, they had marks on their necks after a sharp object. So for me, that's not telling the truth to the public, and this is the problem. I actually read an article about what had happened to the women in a Danish newspaper, and it said that the women were found dead, and I didn't at all think terrorism. Then I read an article, an English language international article. I don't even remember, because there were a lot of international press writing about this case, and all of these international articles were mentioning eyewitness accounts that these women were found beheaded. The day after the attack, a Moroccan English language news site wrote that they had talked to eyewitnesses and that the women were found beheaded. It wasn't, formally, nobody formally said anything, but it was allegedly. But this Danish media could also write. So, what happened is that the week after the attack, 1,450 articles were written about this terrorist attack. 50 of the articles come close to telling us the truth. They, for instance, say that they're cut in their necks, or one of the articles had an interview with the mother of Luisa Vesta Jespersen, and she says, they have slaughtered my daughter, don't go to Morocco. These were articles who came close to telling us the truth. Only 5 articles out of 1,450 used the word execution about what had happened to the women. Only 3 articles mentioned that they were decapitated. Allegedly, 1 and 2 articles say that they were decapitated. And this was even though BBC and Washington Post and a lot of other international media were writing that these women were decapitated. A French couple had found the women, so the Danish police could have found the French couple if they didn't want to just trust other media writing about eyewitness accounts. They could have found the eyewitness accounts. They could have went down to Morocco and researched. And in 1,400 articles, of course, they used the formulations that found that with marks of sharp marks on necks with after a sharp object or signs of violence. And the women were found with signs of terrorism. The authorities, I think it's a disgrace that we cannot trust our authorities, that they don't tell us the truth. For instance, they also said that there were snow in the mountains, and this was making it difficult to find out what had happened. And this is not true either, because there is footage of the area, drone footage, and there is no snow in that area. So I find this not acceptable in a free, open society. We have to be able to trust our media and our authorities when something like this happens, when a terrorist attack happens, and when a Norwegian and a Danish woman die in a terrorist attack. I believe that both the public and the victims of terrorism deserve for us to know what happened, and I think it's not worthy for the authorities to not tell us the truth, and for the media not to investigate for themselves. So when I wanted to write a blog about this, I wanted to research the case a little bit more. And then I had read that another blogger, Kim Møller from Uriasposten, who also writes about Islamic terrorism in Denmark, he had written on his blog that the video of the beheadings was not what had happened in Morocco, and I wanted to be sure. So I thought, what can I do? I don't want to see the video myself, so I thought, if I share the link, then I can ask people if they've seen it, and then we will have a discussion whether they think it's an earlier incident, a terrorist attack in Syria, for instance, or something like that. And actually, within a couple of hours after me sharing the link, people who had seen the video, and also I spoke with Kim Møller, and we found out that it probably was the beheading of the 2 women in Morocco, and that it was not an old incident. And the day after, the Danish police decided to verify that this was the video of what had happened to the women in Morocco. So if the reason why I did it was only to come closer to the truth, because I didn't want to share this news. I wanted to be more sure now that there was a video allegedly of the attack. I wanted to know more. I didn't do it to expose anyone. I didn't do it to because I was curious. I didn't do it secretive. I did it in public. I shared a public and legal and normal link. It wasn't a coded or a secret link. I didn't upload a video. I just shared a link from one media to another. And at that time, the police in Denmark had not went out and told the public that don't see this, don't watch this video, or don't share the link. They did that after I had shared the link. And also this paragraph is used and was made to criminalize the fact if you share revenge porn or some private pictures of other people. For instance, paparazzi, if they take pictures of celebrities in their private homes, and if they share it in social media or in media, mainstream media, that won't be, you know, allowed. But so it's about sharing private pictures that don't belong in the public, and this paragraph has never been used in this way before, and is now the first time that you use it to try to criminalize the usage of pictures and footage from a terrorist attack. The first time I was on Danish TV, it was in 2009, around the protests in Iran, and at that time Neروژ Sultan was she was shot and killed in the protest, and this is very graphic pictures that went viral, and all media shared this in Denmark as well. And I was sitting multiple times on TV and discussing what was going on in Iran with the footage behind me, and of course nobody had asked her parents whether it was fine to show the pictures, because this was an ongoing protest, an ongoing, you know, event. This was of political and public interest, and therefore nobody had, of course, asked her parents. The same way as when Ghazala Khan, Danish Pakistani woman who got honor killed in Denmark, the Danish media used the picture of her falling to the ground, shot and killed. Sorry. Shot and killed by her brother. And this was, of course, planned with the whole family. And of course, nobody asked the family whether they could use the picture. And in both cases, nobody asked the family. And in many, many other cases, nobody asked the family of James Foley when the pictures and video of his beheading in Syria went viral, and the pictures and video footage was used by mainstream media in all Western countries, including Denmark. And the picture of the Russian ambassador who got shot and died in a museum in Turkey was, I believe, for 2 years ago it was the photo of the year or something like that. So it's nothing new that media also in Denmark use footage and pictures, still and video, to show what happens in war, in terrorism, attacks, and so on. So I am all for the ethical usage of graphic pictures. I don't want to use these pictures ever in my work. I try not to use them, because if I was going to use them every time I wrote about somebody being stoned or executed, in all of the work I do, I work with very, you know, terrorist attacks, honor killings, stoning, beheadings, execution. So I never use graphic pictures. I try not to, and this was only to find out what had happened to the women. And in my book, for instance, there are more than 50 pages of pictures of terror-related pictures, and there are almost none graphic images in the book. And I'm very sorry, and I'm sad that the parents of Louisa Vester Jespersen have felt violated and offended, and that they felt that I was insensitive towards what had happened. It's not true. I was very upset and outraged, and I just wanted to find out what had happened. I wanted the public to know what had happened, and I believe that both the public and the victims of terrorism deserve to know what happens whenever somebody dies in a terrorist attacks all over the world, including, of course, a Dane. When I am a Dane myself, living in Denmark. I am being blamed for being this nasty person, as insensitive and a hateful person who exposed her, and I'm not. I'm really not. And a social authority is now threatening me. And a social authority is now threatening me and my daughter and my family because I criticize Islam. And this should, of course, not be happening in a free and open society. But I'm still standing, and whenever I go through hard times, and it's, of course, always been hard being an Islam critic, emotionally and psychologically, whenever I'm down or I'm about to give up, I think about, then I get emotional again. I think about the men and women in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in Afghanistan, in in Somalia, in Sudan, in all of these countries, in Iraq, Syria, who are fighting against Islam's power over them. Sorry. I'm very sorry. And I have it good compared to a lot of people who don't have the freedom, or I still have more freedom than they have. And we are all lucky here in the West, whether we were born here or whether we came here and we live here as citizens. We shouldn't take our freedoms for granted. Freedom and democracy is not, it's not the way that most people in this world live. Civilized disagreements is not usual and normal when you look around the world and you see what is going on. It is very rare. What we have in the West is very rare, and it is worth fighting for and preserving, and we need not to take it for granted. And we stand on the shoulders of... Sorry. I'll try to get through this, not getting emotional. But we stand on the shoulders of men and women who have fought for our freedoms and rights. For generations, people have improved what we are now happy to enjoy every day. Our safety, our democracy, our rights, our freedom of speech, and civilized conversation. And freedom of speech is the pillar of our societies. We can't have freedom and democracy without freedom of speech. And this progress and this success and our culture and history in the West is worth fighting for, and it matters, and it made us, and I hope that we will cherish it, and we should cherish it, and we should cheer on people all around the world fighting to get a little bit of what we have here in the Western countries. And this is my last words. Thank you.